here joining us outdoors at Tansley Woods. Hello to everybody on Facebook Live, watching on Vimeo, listening on iTunes. So glad you're here. You may be wondering why we're outside. We had a little mix-up in the booking. Elections Ontario. Apparently elections are more important than our little gathering, but we're glad. We're like Terry just prayed. We're grateful to live in a country where we get to vote. So we're really glad you're here. Have you ever noticed, maybe in your past or maybe even right now, have you ever noticed Christians, quote unquote, that just seem like they're really angry all the time? You know, like they seem to have no problem just letting everybody know about what they're against and what they're angry about and what's wrong in the world. They do a very great job communicating all that, yet you don't see nearly the kind of tone you would expect to see from Jesus. Have you ever seen that in Christendom? I've always been perplexed by this. If you search through TV sometimes, every now and then you'll come across a TV preacher and he's preaching the good news like this. And he's pointing and he's red-faced and he's angry and you wonder, you're like, why is that exactly? This morning we're going to be looking at why it is that some Christians, rather than be known by their love, we're going to find out why some tend to be known for what they're against and why they're angry. The message title is Angry Birds. Let me bring you up to speed for those of you that haven't been tracking with this series. This series called Christian, It's Not What You Think. Part of my experience, I wasn't raised going to church. I kind of came into it on my own in high school, and I was always confused by what I read about Jesus in the New Testament and what I saw sometimes at church and with Christians, and I was confused because Jesus seemed to be a guy who people who are nothing like Jesus, they flocked to be around Jesus. People that were considered the lowest in culture, the outcast, the sinners, the worst of the worst, they seem to love Jesus. And yet when I look at churches today, people who are nothing like Jesus, they want nothing to do with the church. And it's quite often because the church hasn't seemingly lived out what Jesus said. We've seen in this series that the word Christian, Jesus never used that term when he was describing his followers. The word Christian was given by some outsiders. Jesus had another term for those that would choose to follow him, and it was the word disciple. The word Christian is not defined anywhere in the Bible. You can call yourself a Christian and believe whatever you want and behave however you want, and if somebody challenges you on any of that, you just say, hey, I'm a Christian. Leave me alone. But there's no definition for that. But if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you see what Jesus said when he said, be my disciples, it is terrifyingly clear what he meant. And Jesus, he said, the whole world will know you are my disciples if you love one another. So the whole world ought to look and say, you must be one of those Jesus followers. Just the way that you love people, whether they're like you or totally not like you, that ought to be the defining mark of a Jesus follower. And so last week we saw one of the ways Jesus loved people. Jesus was filled to the brim with grace and truth. This is kind of profound for us because most of us, we live in a world where we're not full of grace and truth at the same time. We're not 100% both. We'll say, well, okay, I'm not going to speak the truth right now. I'm just going to be gracious. Or we'll say, you know what, the time for grace is over. You need to hear this, and we go all out on this. And yet Jesus had a completely different approach. He was 100% full of both. And so last week we gave some examples of how we saw Jesus, how this played out with what Jesus did. We looked at the woman at the well. We looked at Matthew, the tax collector. We looked at the thief on the cross and the woman who was caught in adultery. And we saw the examples of Jesus being full of grace and truth, the way that he dealt with people. Today we're going to be looking at a story, a passage where Jesus actually taught about grace and truth and how both go together. And so we're in Luke 15 today, and let me introduce you to the audience that we find in Luke 15. If you want to go on your phones to Luke 15, we'll be reading from there today. Obviously, we don't have it on the screen. But in Luke 15, Jesus, he's got a crowd all around him. It said that the sinners and the tax collectors, they would flock to being with Jesus. And so they were all there, and here's what it says actually in Luke 15:1. It says, now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. Now, let me just explain tax collectors once again for some of you that may not know. tax collectors are hated today, right? I mean, if you work for the CRA, chances are you're not bringing that up at a party. Hey, I enforce tax law. How are you doing in that area? They're not exactly loved today, but back then, think of gangs of drug dealers, okay? They would come up in their pimped out Escalades or donkeys or whatever they pimped out back then, and then out they would get. And these guys had the power to take whatever that they wanted from you. And it was kind of like a pyramid scheme in the sense that the Romans, they were getting the good share of the taxes, but they would tell their tax collectors, who, by the way, they were Jewish people taking money from their own people. And so that's partly why they were hated so much, is they were traitors. But they could take as much as they want to. And when they got off their pimped out ride and they're asking you for a month's wage, and they just took your month's wage last month, and you see the way they're living, of course they were hated. They were hated and despised. There were sinners, like people who had low morals, and then there were tax collectors. They were even worse. And so if Jesus was at church, what this would mean is that by the time all of the church-going folk arrived at church for the service, there was no place for the church people, because the sinners and the tax collectors, they had already taken all the front seats, and there's no place for the others. But it says in verse 2 here, it says, "But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law," who obviously were there as well, the Pharisees, now they were like Navy SEAL religious people. They were people who, they had their notebooks of all 600 laws of the Old Testament. They knew, and they were enforcers. They're like, you're not doing this law, number 452, yeah, you're not doing that, and we're getting you in trouble. That's who the Pharisees were. And so the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they were there. And they said this, they said, this man, Jesus, he welcomes sinners and he eats with them. He welcomes sinners and he eats with them. And they're thinking, how can this be? Like Jesus, he claims, you see the way Jesus was raised. He has agreement with the Pharisees in terms of what's right and wrong. In terms of morality and doctrine and theology, Jesus has more in common with the Pharisees who in the Old Testament than he does with the sinners. In terms of Jesus' morality and Jesus' lifestyle, he actually would have more to relate to with the Pharisees, and they can't understand, Jesus, why in the world are you eating with sinners? Like, that is an intimate kind of a thing, right? It's not unlike you. If you're going to have someone over for dinner, that's kind of it's a big step in a relationship, right? You're eating meals with them, talking about life. And the question that all of them would have been asking was this: Jesus, do you condone their behavior? You're hanging out with sinners and tax collectors. Are you saying that what they're doing isn't wrong? Are you saying that the way they live their life and their morality and all of that stuff and how they don't honor God in all these areas, are you saying that that's okay, that they don't have to honor God and all that stuff? If you're eating with them and hanging out with them, you must be giving your thumbs up like, hey, none of that matters. Hey, live however you want to. Jesus, do you condone their behavior? Because obviously they're thinking, okay, if he welcomes them, well, he must agree with that. And here's where Jesus goes next with what we see in the rest of Luke 15. He's going to teach them something that is so difficult for them to believe and understand. He knows, like a parent. I've got 4 kids, and what I've learned is that each of my kids are different, and sometimes I need to be very, very intentional and careful in how I tell them difficult things that they may not want to hear. I can't just come at it directly. Sometimes I have to kind of come through the back door with it, right? And so Jesus, he decides, you know what? The best way for me to help you understand what I'm about to teach you about how I love sinners and tax collectors, the best way for me to do this is to use a parable. And so parables were something that essentially it was a made-up story. A parable was something untrue used to illustrate something that is true. And so Jesus, he decides, you know what? This isn't a real story. I'm making this up just to help you understand. And he goes ahead and he's going to explain something very difficult. But what he does is he gets sinners and tax collectors and religious people. He gets them all on the same page with something. Think about this for half a second. Think of how difficult it would be to try and speak to religious people in a way that they're saying, oh, give me more, I love that, I'm with you. How do you speak to religious people and keep the irreligious people also engaged at the same time? It would seem impossible, but Jesus, time and again, he says, let me show you how it's done, okay? I'm not going to start with, I'm starting with an emotion that everybody here is going to say, I felt that, I get it. And so Jesus, he launches into a story, verses 3 and 4 of chapter 15. He says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after that lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts the sheep on his shoulders and goes home. And Jesus is saying to everybody, hey, many of you are farmers. Isn't that what you do? And the Pharisees are probably nodding, yep, that's what I do. And the irreligious people, the sinners and tax collectors, yep. And I'm sure both crowds are going, I can't believe we're agreeing with each other. Like, we are like so different. And yet, okay, yes, that is what I would do. I would leave the 99, I'd go get the one, and then I would celebrate. And then he continues, he says, then after the farmer finds a sheep, he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me. Rejoice with me. I found my lost sheep. Isn't that what you do? And the Pharisees are going, yeah. I'd call my friend. I'd say, hey, listen, remember how I told you, please pray. I've lost something so valuable and important to me. Oh, I found it. Isn't that what you do? Yeah. Isn't that what you do? And they're like, yeah. Everyone sits over here like, why are you picking us as the sinners and tax collectors? I'm sorry. Unintentional. But listen. So now everybody's in agreement here. Everybody's in agreement. And Jesus says this. He says, I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. And then he, after saying this, he's using this as an illustration. God, he is more excited when that one who strayed is found, is back and is with the 99. He rejoices more in that moment than over the 99 who were with him all along. And then he tells another story. And he says, okay, and ladies, he says, isn't it true if you had a coin, and back then it was a lot different. For us, coin is like Tim Hortons change, right? Back then, that's like inheritance. That's like extremely valuable. That's like what they're going to live on for years. And he says, ladies, isn't it true if you lost a coin, wouldn't you start tearing the whole house apart, moving furniture, and looking everywhere for that coin? All of a sudden, nothing else matters. That lost thing, it has your full and undivided attention as you're looking for that because it is so valuable. It is so important to you. Don't you just turn everything upside down looking for it? And of course, the ladies on both sides and everyone in the group's going, yeah, Jesus, when I lose something that's very, very important to me, yes, it consumes all my attention. That's where my mind goes. And then Jesus tells one more story. And this is a story that many of you are familiar with. We're going to look at a part of the story that maybe you're not as familiar with. But in Luke, he goes into a story about two sons. And there's these two sons. It's interesting. Jesus knew more about birth order back then than it took us a long time to figure out birth order matters, right? He's talking about an older brother who was the behavior. And then there was a younger brother who was kind of the more rebellious one. Now, just out of curiosity, how many of you is the oldest, the older sibling? Anybody out there? Yeah, you raised that. Isn't that somewhat true? You're like, yeah, generally, my siblings were different than me, right? That's just, hey, science and sociology. It's not all the time, but generally it backs it up. And so Jesus tells his story about two sons. And what the younger son, he comes up to his dad, who was a landowner, wealthy guy, and the younger brother says to his dad, says, Dad, I want my inheritance now. Which essentially, what he's saying is, Dad, I wish you'd die. I wish you would die so that I could have what is rightfully mine, all of the money and the wealth. I kind of wish that you were dead so I can do this. And universally, as Jesus is telling this story, sinners and tax collectors and Pharisees, they're all totally appalled at the same time. All of them are saying, that is wrong. Who would dare go up to their father? Especially one who's got some net worth, so to speak, who's got a reputation in the community. And he's saying, yeah, the younger brother says, yeah, I wish you would die. Can I have what is mine? And then Jesus, he totally blindsides everybody. Everybody would be thinking that the father would totally come down on the son. But Jesus says, no, and so this father did. He went and he sold land. And he divided up the money. And he said, younger son, here, yes, I'm going to give you, here's your lifetime inheritance. And it says that this younger brother, he then took all of that money and all of the resources, and he decided, you know what, I'm going to get out of this community. I'm going far, far away where no one's going to know what I'm up to. And he goes to this faraway country, and he starts squandering the wealth. He's throwing parties that he can't afford, big parties, paying for, you know, all the wine and all of the, I don't know, goat cheese and whatever they had back then. He's paying for all of it. He's living the high life. He's living like a millionaire. And it says that in a short period of time, this son, he took everything that father, it took him a lifetime to amass all of that stuff, and he blows all of it in a short period of time. And next thing you know, this younger son, he's working from one job to the next job to the next job. And he finds himself working, there's a famine in the land. There's no food to eat. And as he's at this one job, he's actually feeding pigs. And back then, to the Jewish audience, pigs were a very unclean animal. And so the audience, as they're hearing this story, they'd be thinking, man, this is a great story. I got to tell all my friends. See, this younger son, he's getting what he deserved. He went ahead and squandered everything. He said he wished his dad was dead. And now he's not only hungry, he's having to work with the most disgusting, unclean animal, which carries with it great shame in that culture. And everybody would have said, Jesus, this is a great story. I'm going to tell my kids. See, kids, what goes around comes around. If you go ahead and you do this kind of stuff, this is what's going to happen to you. That's what everybody was expecting. But it says that in verse 17, the younger son, it says, when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. So at this point, the younger son, apparently he's smart enough to realize he cannot expect to go back as a son. Not going to happen. But he realized that, man, my dad, he is a good man. The way that he treats the servants and employees that work for him, he is a good man to them. I will just come back and I'll beg for a job like I'm not his son. And if I have any fortune at all, my father, he might go ahead and take me back. But here's what it says in Luke 15. It says, but while he, the younger son, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with, and everybody in the audience, they knew what the father was filled with. Anger. Anger. You have the gall to say you wish I was dead, and then you take everything I've amassed over my whole lifetime, and you go and you, who knows, but you're coming back stinky, and I'm seeing you on the and you have the balls to come back here after everything you've done. Anger. Everybody would have known. Of course the father's filled with anger. That's what this whole story should be about, right? But then it says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. Filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son. This is getting crazier and crazier. Everyone's confused. What do you mean he was filled with compassion? He ran. See, back then, if you were a landowner and someone with reputation, you had a long robe, and it was part of your dignity. And to show your ankles or to show your legs, that was dishonorable. We don't totally get this in our culture, but back then, that was like you were shaming yourself. You were bringing shame on yourself just to show your legs. You were way above that. Don't do that. For him to run to his son, he has to literally hike up his rope so he's able to run, and everybody's going, this story just got stupid. None of this is making any sense whatsoever. And it says that he ran to his son and he threw his arms around him and kissed him. And you see, the reason Jesus' audience is confused, the Pharisees and the tax collectors are like, where did this story go? Okay, this would have been a great story if you ended it in the pig thing. We get it. You see, stories, generally, we identify with somebody. And so up until this point, they figured that, the father in this story was God. And they figured that this younger son, he was the sinner, the tax collector, and he was getting what he deserved. And now all of a sudden, you say that the father, who apparently is God, all of a sudden you're saying he was filled with compassion when he saw this son who did everything he could possibly do as a son to bring shame on him as a father. And it says he was filled with compassion, and he ran to him and gave him hugs and kisses. And we're seeing here Jesus, as he's teaching, he's saying, you know what? I'm full of grace and truth. And we're so confused though. Grace and truth, how? This isn't making any sense. And so Luke 15, verse 21 says, the son, the younger son, he said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said, verse 22, but the father said to his servants, and of course, most people are waiting for Jesus to say, okay, the father said to his servants, get the guillotine ready, get the noose ready, we're going to have a public demonstration of what's going on here, but that's not what it says. It says, but the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Now, I don't know about you, but think with me on this. It says here that the father's first reaction, he said, quick, get the robe and the ring, quick. I don't know about you, but I think the way that I think as a 21st century Canadian, I'd be thinking, okay, hold on, quick. Why don't let's see how this plays out for a couple weeks. We don't know why he's coming back. Is this a genuine, like he feels bad about the shame he brought on his father and he's coming back now? Like maybe we should make him stay at like a halfway house outside of town or something and we can go check in on him over a couple weeks. Like who's to say if anything has changed at all? But that's not what God says. God wasn't waiting. In this story, the father, he wasn't waiting to see how this would pan out. He said, no, let's do this now, quick. Get the robe, get the ring, let's put the sandals on his feet. It says in verse 23, the father said, bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. Now, the fattened calf, this was a special animal that was reserved for the best of occasions. We're talking like wedding of your son. We're talking like major graduation, any number of things that wasn't this. And so, and this is where, for most of us who have heard this story before, the story of the prodigal son, for most, this is where the story ends. And it's a story of God's amazing love for those who have run off, that are far from God, that have left. And the story is about come back. God is not angry. God is not angry at you. Come as you are. For most of us, that's where the story ends. But remember, how many brothers were there in this story again? There were two brothers. Here's the flip side on what happens next. Verse 28. And what happens is, of course, the younger son, he's out doing his job as he's been doing his whole life, working hard. And all of a sudden he hears commotion. And people are running, what's going on? And then he sees Frank. Frank, what do you got the fattened calf there for? What is that all about? And he's like, hey, your brother's back. And the older brother's probably thinking, gee, I thought it would be my younger brother on the cart, not the fattened calf, but what's going on? And he said, hey, listen, your dad, he's throwing a party. He's got the sandals on his feet, the ring on his finger, the robe and everything, and he's throwing a party. He wants you to come. This is what the older brother, it says in verse 28. It says the older brother became angry. The older brother became angry and refused to go in to the party. You ever met an angry Christian before? Ever grow up with an angry nun? My mom, she was raised in Catholic school, and some of the stories she has told me about some of the nuns at her school, it was just flat out abuse. It was anger. It was back of the hand, smack to the face. It was all kinds of craziness. Have you ever seen an angry pastor before? You ever seen an angry TV preacher before? You ever leave church? You ever leave church because you were just tired of angry Christians? This is the experience for untold thousands of people in our city, in our country, in North America. They read about Jesus and they read about how he loved, and yet they see a lot of angry Christians. And they say, I'm tired of all that. I'm tired of the judgment and the red face, and I'm tired about the pastor at the front calling out a group of my friends and calling up what their life is, calling that sin. And a lot of people got tired of that. Why are they against everything? Why are Christians seemingly against everything? They must be against me too. And so people move on. Oh, you're a Christian, that's nice, bye. And they go another direction. Now, here's the thing. Let's recap the story here for a second. The younger son, who's having the fattened calf come out, he doesn't want to go to the party. Do you know why he doesn't want to go to the party? Because he's saying, I don't deserve a party. I've just brought shame upon my dad, and I've done all this stuff. I just wanted to kind of come in quietly and be like a servant and a hired hand. And so I don't want to go to the party. Everybody's looking at me like Mr. Sinner Guy. We know what you did. And I have no desire to go to the party because I don't belong at the party. And the older brother, he's saying, I don't want to go to the party because my younger brother's going to be at that party. And I know the stuff that he did. And I've been doing all the right stuff all this time. And he's been doing that. So if my brother's going, I'm not going to the party. And so both brothers don't want to go to the party. And everybody, all of Jesus listeners, they're all confused going, what the heck is going on with this story? Because here's the thing. Because nobody understood how God views sinners. Both the sinner and the tax collectors didn't understand how God views sinners. And the religious people didn't understand how God views sinners. And so the story continues, verse 28. It says, the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So he went, so his father went out and pleaded with the older brother. The father, he leaves whatever the party preparation is to go to talk to the older brother. And he's pleading, he's saying, please come to the party. I want you to come to the party. This is so important. Please come. Verse 29 says, but the older brother answered his father. He said, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Do you know why there are angry Christians? It's because they think they deserve something from God that somebody else might get. There are people that have been attending church their whole life that say, God, I've been faithful to you. I've showed up early and I've stayed late and I've given a good percentage of my income and I've done all this stuff and I've been on teams. I've gone to places. I've been a good person. I've tried my best to raise my kids hard, and I'm angry because I don't like the way you give to other people blessings that I think you ought to be given to me. The reason there's angry Christians is because they think that God owes them something for all that they've done. And they are angry that they might be missing out on something when they've done all this good stuff. And the root of it is self-righteousness. I'm not immune to this. As Christians, we sometimes think, God, where's my break? When am I going to get what's coming to me? Do you not notice all the stuff I've been doing? And all of a sudden, we become the older brother. And we lose sight about what God is doing from the very, very beginning. And so, self-righteous Christians, they're angry, but they're not like Jesus. You know what? You could start a political party with that viewpoint that we deserve something. We've been doing this right. we've been giving and serving and doing all this right stuff. You could start a political party to try and like enforce this on everybody. We're going to get what's coming to us. When is it our turn? It's our turn now, okay? We've let all you crazy sinner, tax collector, liberals take over everything. We're starting a political party because it's our turn. We've been doing things right. We want everyone else to do it right. You could start a movement that boycotts stuff over that older brother attitude. Let's boycott it. They don't deserve anything good because of the way they're living. We have been living the right way, and we deserve all the good stuff. And it's self-righteous. And it breaks God's heart, because that's not what it's about. Luke 15:29. The older brother, he's continuing. He's saying, he says, I've never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat. All right? You talking about the fattened calf, you're giving that, you haven't even given me a goat. It's kind of interesting. Sometimes I see, young people, teenagers having and it'll be over something like, rather silly. They got the better hot dog. You're like, dude, it's a hot dog. But nonetheless, he's saying, you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, he's not saying when my brother, he's saying when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? And I'm mad. That's what the older brother was saying. I'm mad. This is unjust. This is not fair. And here's the turning point of this whole thing. Luke 15:31. The father says, my son, you are always with me. You're always with me. To which the older brother probably would have been like, what? Dad, did you change the subject? What are you talking about? I'm always with you. What does that have to do with anything? Did you hear my speech? Did you hear about how I've been doing everything right and you haven't rewarded me like this, and he goes out and does all this bad stuff and you reward him? Did you not hear any of that speech? And the father, he's saying, you're missing the point. You see, what I value most is being with. As a father, that's the number one thing I value. I value being with. And he very may well said, son, I'm not going to divide everything up again. He's already got his inheritance. You're still getting everything that's coming to you. You don't have to worry about that. That's not what this is about. Son, you're going to get your reward, and you're going to get everything that you've been working, you're going to get that. I haven't forgotten about you. He says, your little speech, son, I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't understand. You were always with me. That's the most important thing. You were always with me. But he wasn't. And so in verse 32, the father says, but we had to celebrate. We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. The father's saying, this isn't about performance. This is about proximity. That's what I care about most. It's not performance. See, you think you ought to be rewarded more because of your performance, and he thinks he shouldn't get anything because of his performance. You're both missing the point. That's not what this is about. This is about proximity. This is about me being with my sons. Proximity, that's what I care about most. So I'm sure he said, you need to go and talk to your younger brother because he's hung up on the same exact thing you are. You both think it's about performance. It's not about that. It's about being with. One of the biggest differences between being a Christian and being a disciple is the belief that God could not love you more. Nothing you do will cause him to love you less. Disciples believe this. Disciples download and understand there's nothing you could do performance-wise to make God love you anymore. There's not more money you could give, more mission trips to go on, more, I'm not going to look at that on the internet, I shouldn't do that, I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be forgiving to my enemies, all that's, God's going to owe me now. He's going to love me more because I just did all the stuff that he's asked me to do. God's going to love me more. He's saying, no, it's not about that. There's nothing you can do to make me love you more. I love you 100% because you're you and I created you. There's nothing you could do that would make me love you less. There's nothing you could ever do to make me love you less. And the difference between Christians and disciples is this. Christians believe, you know what? God's got, and you know what? If he doesn't reward me in this life, it's coming. And I can't wait. As some Christians would think, I can't wait to see them get what they deserve. Ooh, they think, it's coming. It's coming, and I'm going to get what I deserve, and it's going to be glorious. That's how Christians think. Disciples, they understand that it's not about performance. There's nothing you could do to make God think you're more important than anybody else. And so, where does this angry Christian thing come from? It comes from I, me. It's self-righteousness. So here's some takeaways for two groups of people that I think that we learn from this story. Takeaways for followers, for those that have already embraced a relationship with Jesus. They've said, you know what, I don't know if I buy into the whole, Christian thing, church thing, but man, Jesus, I'm compelled, I want to follow him. I want to get to know Jesus, and I want to be his disciple. What Jesus taught, sign me up. I want to do that. For those who've decided to be followers, when we love like Jesus did, full of grace and truth, full of both, when we love like Jesus did, sin, it should break our hearts. But we're not angry. We're not angry when we see sin. We're just, our hearts are broken. Like a parent, I understand this so much, especially now that I have teenagers. My teenagers, they've already made some predictable mistakes in their work habits, at school, relationships and stuff. And they've committed some sins. And when I see that, you know what my emotion is? My heart breaks. Because I've made those mistakes. I'm not angry at their mistakes. I'm heartbroken. Because sin has a gotcha. We choose to sin. We choose to suffer. When we go down those paths, we're undermining our own happiness. And it breaks my heart. And it ought to, for followers of Jesus, sin, it ought to break our hearts. It ought not make us angry. But repentance stirs our heart. Repentance stirs our heart. That's why baptism stories, goodness, there's no bigger day of the whole year for me than when we baptize those who have said, you know what, I want to follow Jesus. I'm in. And they share their story about coming to God. And they shared their unique story about how that happened. And we celebrate that they've chosen to be with God. They didn't let their mistakes, their sins, their life choices stand in the way. Say, oh, I could never do that. They say, you know what? Jesus loves me, even though the most shameful thing that I don't want to tell anyone. God said, I'm forgiven, and he embraces me. He says, don't let that stop you, please. I want to know you. I want to be with you. And we celebrate baptism because of that. Here's some takeaways for prodigals, though. Takeaways for prodigals is that if you've run from God and you've chosen to go down some paths, and you know right now there's some family members that it might be awkward if you ran into them at the grocery store, or you've got some stuff from your past you haven't quite dealt with, and you've decided, conceptually I hear the God stuff, but that's not me. I don't think God would take me back for what I've done. Here's what you need to know. Number one, your sin is hurting you and others. I'm not saying that in a condemning way. I'm saying that there's so many times in my life that I heard something was wrong and I went ahead and did it and nothing happened, and I'm like, why did they say that was wrong? That actually was a lot of fun. That was great. And I go down that road, and sometimes it's days, sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months or years. I come to the conclusion like, oh, that's why. That's why they said that that's sin and they shouldn't do it. And what I've discovered is that when I sin, I'm not only hurting myself, but I'm hurting those around me. And here's the other thing, is that the longer you run, the worse it will be. The longer you run, the worse it'll be. So God is saying, come back to prodigals. He's saying, come back. I'm looking for you. I'm not angry. I'm not mad at you. I'm saying, please, this is what I'm all about. I want to be with you. Won't you come? There's nothing stopping us from being together except you. I'm looking on the horizon, and he's saying, I want you to come back. I don't want you to join a church. I don't want you to join a religion or an institution. I want a relationship. Your Heavenly Father who made you is looking for you. And He would say, come back. You know, some of us watching online or here, you're living in sin. And something in your conscience, and don't take that as, Mike, what do you mean? What do you mean? Some of you, you just know there's something in your conscience. You don't need anyone to tell you. You just, something in your conscience says, yeah, you know what, that's wrong, and I've been doing it. Sin has a gotcha. And some of you need to address that head on. Some of you need to make a phone call. You need to pick up the phone and you need to call somebody. You need to speak with them. Some of you need to confess something at work and say, I know this might cost me, but I need to clear my conscience and I need to do what's right. I need to make restitution. Some of you need to move out. Some of you have made decisions that you realize, you know what, I don't know if that's honoring God. And some of you need to just bring it up with a friend and say, I don't even know, it seems like leaving my life of sin, it's a big thing. I don't even know where to go. Just get Mike or someone, Christian friend, somebody that loves me as I am. They're not going to judge me. They're not going to condemn. I need to talk to them and say, help me. What would my next step be? Some of us need to do this. But here's another thing we need to remember. When you lose your phone, if you lose your phone, are you angry at your phone? Are you angry that it's lost? My guess is you're not angry at your phone. You're angry, you might be angry at yourself, but you're not angry at the phone. And God in the same way. God is searching. He's not angry at you. He's looking, He's searching for you. He wants you to be with Him because that's why He created you. The reason you're breathing right now is because God made you for a relationship with Him. And He's chasing after you, and there's nothing you could do to make Him love you more. There's nothing you could do to make Him love you any less. And He wants to stomp out self-righteousness from the older brother, and He wants to stomp out unrighteousness with the younger brother. And He just says, come, I want to be with you. I invite you just to close in a word of prayer with me as we wrap things up. Father, I don't know where this falls today. There's been times where I've read this story and it has just rocked me to my core. And yet, there's other times where I know it's powerful. Yet I don't know what to do. And yet, God, I know right now there are some listening to this online. There's some here outside, and they know exactly what you're saying to them. God, I pray that you would give them the courage. I pray you'd give them bravery to take an action step. Even if it's only in their hearts right now saying, Father, thank you for accepting me and loving me. Thank you for not being angry at me. Thank you for not wanting to kick me out and give me what I deserve. Father, I want to come back. And they can know that that is possible because even though God is holy and blazing like the sun, perfection and holy and has incredibly high standards, that same Father sent Jesus Christ to live out all of that perfection. And when He died on that cross, He was looking at you right in the eyeball and He was saying, I'm doing this for you because I love you. And Jesus absorbed all of our sin. And when He raised from the dead 3 days later, it was to prove and give us hope that this isn't some made-up fairy tale, and I guess we'll just have to take Him at His word. It was proof that your love has conquered everything. So, Father, I just ask you right now, for the person accepting you again, maybe they're rededicating their life, maybe they knew you in their younger days and they're just coming back now. I pray the same way that this passage says there's a party going on in heaven, there's a celebration. Help them understand that right now, Father, the angels in heaven, they are celebrating over their choice to come back to you. And I pray that you would help them connect with the family of like-minded people. I pray that that might be starting point, and that they wouldn't see starting point as a church, but they'd see it as a family of like-minded people. God, I pray for the person, they need some courage to pick up the phone or to confide and take some steps about getting right and they've been living in a life of sin and they don't know what's next. God, I pray that you would give them the courage to take a step, even if it's only to talk to me. I pray they'd know that there's no condemnation, there's just wanting to help them be in closer proximity with their God. So, Father, go with us. I pray that maybe even this mix-up with the elections, God, I pray that you might be writing a story we weren't aware of, and that we'll see that there's a reason we couldn't meet inside today. But thank you for all you're doing. Help us to be the family you've called us to be. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.